Why did I enter the markets? When I was young, there were four boys, we used to travel in my dad's car, and he would drive along, and playfully, he would value the cars coming the opposite direction. He would first identify them, and then rapid fire, he'd say Ford Zephyr 1961, £210. Morris Minor 1953, £43. And I was terribly impressed by this notion of valuing something as quickly as that and understanding it. And he didn't make it up as he went along. He really did know what the prices were. And I thought nothing more about this until it came for me to think about getting a job. And I started working in a small private bank, little merchant bank as they were called then. And I worked around doing various things and ended up in the foreign exchange department. And then I found people making prices using a telex machine and very little else about having to have a feel for prices, developing a feel for prices. And I suddenly discovered the delights of this intangible business as what was good value at any one time, making a price, a buy level, a sell level around where you thought was fair value, and getting a desire to uncover what is good value at any one moment, this intangible thing. I also discovered the delight of walking to work without a briefcase and my hands in my pockets. I also discovered the delight of not really having to master a corpus of knowledge. I always thought other people were going to do that better than me, whether it's lawyers or accountants. So not having to read, I never read really papers. I was able to go in and feel the markets, increasingly feel the markets, the atmosphere of the markets, think whether to mark them down or up. That felt very good when I started, and still does. But leading from that, why did I become a Chartist? Well, frankly, it was the only way I could begin to understand the markets for more than a few minutes at a time. The feeling of gathering the tension and excitement of a market and whether things were going up or down was all very well. This instinctive, intuitive, animal spirits of the market and uncovering what they were and what they were doing of fear and greed was all very well. But in the end, I needed something to guide my trading in a more strategic way. And although I'd read economics, it didn't really help me very much. It struck me. And I needed a way of understanding and analysing the markets. I was working on the floor of, in 1983, I was working on the floor of the markets in Chicago. And I noticed that the Eurodollar pit was very young and emergent there, and the big pit was growing fast. The big pit was the Treasury bill pit, but the Eurodollar pit was very young and growing, and they hadn't really kept up with the growth of demand for Eurodollar futures. And so the pit was physically a very small area, and lots of people were trying to crush into it. And I was watching the pit acting as a yellow jacket runner, and I noticed that hundreds of people seemingly were there, and it was wobbling. And at some point, when the bidding and trading got to a huge tumult and crisis and crescendo, they all fell off the podiums, and people were crushed, and they were taken away in stretchers. And then I thought, I need to have a way of rationalizing this activity, this chaotic, animalistic activity. And I noticed also that traders in the middle of the pit were doing, on the back of their trading cards, were doing small charts to understand when the market had broken out of support and resistance or consolidatory areas. And there were always in the telephone booths, there were bar charts, and candlesticks came later. They were popularized later. So charts were a way of rationalizing this amazingly animal experience, which I felt at ease with, but needed a more strategic way of harnessing it to take advantage of it, to take money out of the market. Charts were my way of rationalizing the markets, simplifying them. I've talked about the dangers of simplification though as well, which are the idea of getting a narrative in your mind of a picture and being slave to it. The danger of beginning to think you understand the markets. I think good chartists don't believe they understand the markets. They haven't discovered the key to the markets, the inner workings of the market. It's simply a useful representation to discover opportunities where the odds may be more in your favor than normally, and that if you continually trade on those opportunities, you will make money over time. They are not a guide to the workings of the market. They reveal nothing. They're a useful simplification. They don't mean you understand the market. And I think reminding ourselves of the complexity of the market time and again, and how ours is a purely surfaced construct to help us make trading decisions as opposed to understanding it, is a useful exercise in humility, which we must never forget. It keeps us sharp, but it's certainly a useful exercise. The various avenues for traders, prospective traders, are to remain a gut instinct short-term trader that can take advantage of moments of exuberance, too much greed or too much fear. They're typically the scalpers, but much more difficult now that put pits, for example, don't exist in London, but you can still do it on desks, so you're a little more remote from the action. Or you can be a fundamentalist and say, the Treasury bond futures are this, and it feels wrong that they're so high because of the government debt and inflation and so on and so forth. There are those avenues still, but for me it was charting. The industry's changed. I mean, there was room for scalpers. Arguably at one time the markets obeyed a coherent set of economic fundamentals, and a lot of those have changed rapidly. So everybody has to change with the market as the times have changed, and as sovereign risk has come in, as massive deficits have come in, as recessions have come and gone, as stock markets have halved twice in the last 10 years. So everybody's had to adapt, no question about it. Everyone's had to adapt. But you can still be a scalper, and you can still be a fundamentalist, and you can still, thank goodness, be a chartist.